Okay.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. So we have a number of items for Cabinet today. And before we start, are there any apologies for absence, Nick?
Just apologies from Councillor Paul-Griffiths.
Thanks very much. Cabinet, is anyone who needs to declare an interest for items on this? Okay, I'll go straight into the first substantive item on the agenda. That's the review of the Respite Opportunity Service with recommendations. That's over to you, Councillor Chandler.
Thanks, Leader. I want to just introduce this paper. I want to start out just by acknowledging that it is a difficult decision, but it is a decision that we're trying to make that is about responding to changing patterns of demand and ensuring that the services that we are delivering are developed in a way that is sustainable over the longer term. And our Respite Opportunity Service is based on a genuine desire to provide individual choice. That's both meeting the needs of carers to have a break, but also, and just as importantly, offering an enriching experience for the cared for person. And our proposals and the review is also about the release of resources and stopping doing something that is no longer representing good value for money for the council, so that we can support the other options more robustly. And I would like to say that before I hand over to the Director of Social Services to say a bit more about this, I would like to just emphasise that this decision, this proposal and review has been through a rigorous scrutiny process. We've taken every opportunity for consultation, for scrutiny, and to discuss with stakeholders outside of formal meetings as well. But at the end of the day, we're at the stage where we need to make a decision. And in fact, all stakeholders, that's the workforce, it's the families that are involved, and the service as a whole needs a decision to enable us to move forward. So given that introduction, I would like, and before that, I just want to then emphasise at the end of the day what the recommendations are that we're saying. So I think it's worth me just highlighting them. So the recommendations that we are deciding upon today is number one, it's to expand the range of supported holiday opportunities to enable greater choice to match people's interests and needs. Secondly, is to create holiday opportunities for people who are wheelchair users or who have higher level care needs. Third is to refocus residential respite options so that people can access support in a range of different homes, including those in neighbouring counties. And linked to that is recommendation 4, which is to cease to provide our in-house residential respite at Button Crescent. Number 5 is again to extend the availability of shared life support to specifically enable people who are wheelchair users who have higher level care needs. 6, to develop a respite at home option for people who prefer to remain at home when their family is away. And 7, to promote and increase the uptake of direct payments for people who need respite. So those are the recommendations that we are putting. Number 8 is to develop a range of robust emergency respite options, including with shared lives and with that residential respite and respite at home, so we can provide those emergency respite options. So those are the 8 recommendations in the paper. I'm going to hand over to Jane Rogers, the Director of Social Care, to just take us through a little bit more about the review and those recommendations and put it in a bit of context. And then we'll happy to have questions and discussion. So over to you, Jane.
Thank you very much, Councillor Chandler. And my name is Jane Rogers. I'm Chief Officer for Social Care and Safeguarding in Monmouthshire County Council. We thought that the best way of just summarising some of the points that came out of the review and our future vision for the service, the best way to do that was just to use the presentation that we made in the scrutiny committee that dealt with these issues. It's in the papers also that have been published. We just want to start with just re-emphasising what respite is. So it's that opportunity for carers to have a break. We do it under the Social Services and Wellbeing Act. And as Councillor Chandler has said, At the same time, respite should provide enriching opportunities for the people who are cared for. In Monmouthshire, we've taken a direction that promotes positive choice rather than a one-size-fits-all, and we've listed some of the options that we already have available on the slide and in the papers. We set out to do the review really because we'd noticed of demand and the types of services that were being accessed. This has been an evolving picture since 2011, where we started to try to develop more of a sort of individual choice rather than, like I said, the one size fits all. Patterns of trend were observable, changes in the patterns of demand were observable prior to the breakout of the pandemic in 2020. And then during that pandemic period, we had closed the residential respite just in line with some of the response and the closure services that took place during that time. When it came to the easing up of the restrictions that were put in place during the pandemic, because of the pattern of how things had been going leading up to the pandemic, we used that as the opportunity to do a deeper review and to really work out our way forward rather than just reopen the provision straight away. This is just, it's all in the papers, but it's a graph of how people were, the changing use of how people were using respite options over time. We used a lot of methods to undertake the review. We did a good desktop look at what people were using, gathered together a fair amount of service data, and we went through 2 consultation periods with families. We did 2 because the first one didn't evoke the sufficient level of response that we needed, so we refined our methods and went back out for a second period of consultation, and we asked the workforce of Ludden Crescent for their views too. So the review conclusions, it confirmed the way patterns of use had evolved and highlighted aspects that we would need to develop further. We found that on the whole, people were positive about their experiences and liked the fact that there were a variety of options. There were some concerns that everybody should have the same range of opportunities available to them, and that would mean overcoming some barriers for wheelchair users and people with more complex needs. And we also noted how well loved Ludden Crescent was, and that for a few families that remained their first choice. So moving forward, we want to provide a high quality, flexible respite service that offers people's needs, meets their needs, provides choice and supports individual outcomes using a range of services. Sorry, I should say, to do that, we will need to change some of the things that we do differently, which will involve in our proposals something to provide an in-house residential provision so that we can look to support other options in a more comprehensive way. Part of that is not about ceasing to provide residential respite altogether, but would be moving to a commissioning model, buying placements from our neighbouring councils when they are required. So the next couple of slides just look at some of the individual service options that we've got. Shared Lives is a service that we operate across South East Wales, and it's around providing an individual family-based placement into somebody's home for a person with a learning disability. This has been running very successfully over a number of years now, and actually over the pandemic was the one service that really kept going for a respite opportunity for people. Short breaks are becoming increasingly popular over time. There's some stats there to say that between October 21 and August 23, 12 people used a holiday as their main respite option, and lots of different holidays that have been used. And just to reiterate, that's a holiday for the person who has a learning disability. Their parents, carers are not with them. The care is provided in a different way, so the carer has the opportunity for a good break. Just to focus in a little bit more on residential respite, we've noted that the demand for Ludden Crescent has reduced over time. Current capacity of users at 25%, which does call into question its financial and operational viability. We've looked at the options of scaling down, but there are some real challenges with that. We've looked at options of offering placements to other local authorities, but there is a general lack of demand across this type of respite, hence why we're actually able to purchase placements from other local authorities. So our proposal for residential respite is to move to a more commissioning model. We've got a couple of placements that offer us respite. Currently, we have a bed that we purchased for Monmouthshire sole use from our neighbour in Newport called St Trica Lodge, and we use Augusta House up in Blaen y Gwent for other people too. That's we have people using those options at the moment, and they are generally we get a good level of positive feedback about them. We've talked about wanting to develop respite at home. This is in its early stages, and I think there's more we can do there, and encouraging direct payments. And emergency respite is would really be looking to develop that across all the types of offer that we provide, but we already provide it through residential options and shared lives. We know that we need to focus, give a particular focus to people with more complex needs and wheelchair users, and some of the ways that we would like to do that is working again closely with shared lives, looking at targeted recruitment and working proactively with holiday providers so that we work in partnership with them to shape and develop the type of holidays that are available. Just a quick note on carers, because it's really carers at the heart of this. Vitally important that the council supports its carers. We do that through a variety of ways, not just respite. We have a dedicated team that is our carer support team within the council. They provide a lot of advice and support and provide carers' needs assessments. We link up with a number of voluntary agencies to support our offer to carers, including Age Cymru, Care Collective and Building Bridges. A couple of notes just about the impact assessment there and what's known around our demographics in relation to people with learning disabilities within the county, which I won't dwell on. It's all in the papers. Yeah.
Thanks, Jane. So,
is there anything you want to add, Councillor Chandler?
No, I think that presents a very good summary of what's in the paper, and I know everybody's read the papers, and there's quite an extensive paper pack in the agenda, just as part of our robust process of scrutiny and transparency. So I think it's over to maybe hear more about the scrutiny.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Chandler. Before we move to discussion, Cabinet, Councillor Crook, who is the chair of People Scrutiny, is here with us today, as you'd expect. Is there anything you would like to add, Councillor Crook, about the scrutiny of these?
Obviously, on the 10th of August, the People Scrutiny Committee scrutinised this report in some depth, and they forwarded some key points, some 8 key points, which was obviously given to the Cabinet member. But if you look at the formal outcome of the scrutiny, the committee made the following recommendations, and that is if the executive does close Burton Crescent, it fully reviews the respite options, given that the majority of the options are currently unviable for those with complex needs who need 24/7 care. The committee requests that the executive ensures that alternative types of respite support and sharing lives accessible to people and provide the appropriate level of care and support for each individual receiving respite. And secondly, that the executive ensures that social services fully engage intensively with the families who are unhappy with the recommendation to close Burton Crescent, to provide more intensive care and support them, and to see how their needs can be met.
Thank you. that was also addressed within the report that we received, Cabinet, which I think is useful to know. I can see Councillor Garrick is itching to ask a question, and so is Councillor Maybe. I'll take you first. Councillor Garrick.
Thanks. Unsurprisingly, I'm interested in the finances. I think it'd be good to articulate it for anybody who's watching as well. So, could you just really, for benefit of people who's watching, can you articulate what financial factors influenced this recommendation to stop providing an in-house residential respite service?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Garrick. I mean, clearly, we do want to provide value for money, and we also want to ensure that we have the resources to develop the service in the direction that people want. But maybe I could hand over back to Jane Rogers to give a bit more of a detailed response to that.
Certainly. As I've mentioned already, the changing patterns of demand for Budden Crescent have called into question the financial viability of it. And we did some projected numbers of demand based on what we know about demographics of people with learning disability taken from the population needs assessment. That led us to do some projections based on a 37% projected take-up of services provided via the residential respite option, which would equate to 182 nights per year, and we added on an additional 80 nights for unexpected situations or emergency respite. So based on that level of demand, we worked out unit costs. We found that on the current footprint for Budden Crescent, a unit cost, which means the cost for one person for 1 week, would be just over £10,000. If we reduce that footprint and try to do a scale down version, we worked out that we could get it possibly to around £5,500 per unit cost, and that compares with the current unit cost that we have at through our commissioning model with Centrica, which is towards £1,500. Is quite a significant difference, and that really did influence the way that we were thinking about our proposals. The overall costs, which take other factors into account, also show quite a differential in the different models. So we are through a financial lens, fairly confident in our suggestion that Budden Crescent isn't financially viable at this point if you're looking at it purely through a financial lens, and the review has shown that there are other appropriate and sufficient alternative provisions that can be sourced in a cost-effective way for those families who require respite services both now and moving forward in the future as well.
Thanks, Jane. I think it's also, if I just add to that, because I think that going in that detail of what those unit costs are and the fixed costs that are involved in having an in-house residential provision. And if we go back to the proposal paper, so right at the very end, 11.2, where we look at the financial implications, it does estimate that if we agree these changes to service, it will result in an estimated annual saving of £248,445. So that's £250,000 of saving if we do this, or put it the other way around, £250,000 worth of additional expenditure that will be required if we was to keep Budden Crescent open for a small number of users.
Before I bring in Councillor Maybe, that brings me back to the report in which there were several families that were very unhappy with this decision, and for them the option should have always been Budden Crescent for respite care. So what approach are we having with those families? What alternatives are we exploring and thinking about, or indeed are showing within the report that can over time be used by them? And lastly, because essential to this debate, as came out quite clearly in the report for me, the need to maintain and ensure that the voice of the user, people with learning disabilities, is not lost. What are we putting in place, or do in fact these users have advocacy support to allow them to really be able to engage and say what it is they want and how they want it delivered.
Yeah, I think Jane, if you could answer that one for me, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, we're really, you know, throughout this whole process, we've recognised that there are a small number of families that will, you know, be anxious and face some sort of sense of loss if the proposals to close Budden Crescent do go ahead. All of the families that are affected by this decision have an allocated social worker. They are there to work individually with that person and their carers and to think about what, you know, what alternatives they might wish to explore over time, like you said, Leader. In some ways, any of the options that are on the table are available to people, but of course, what they want and what they feel comfortable with and how they might like to access respite in the future will be very dependent on their individual circumstances, their needs, and what choices that they want to make. And we really feel that, you know, the most important voice here is the carers, but it is very much also the person with a learning disability. Our social workers, of course, are very experienced and skilled at making sure that their communication is adapted to ensure that people with learning disabilities do have that voice and communicate in a way that is most suitable for them. In terms of more of an independent voice, anybody who's accessing social care has the right to independent advocacy. We often find that parents and carers can actually be the best advocate. But where we do feel that there is independent advocacy that is required, we have a provider called AWIS who we use to provide a formal independent advocacy service. So there are a number of ways really that we really ensure that the voice of the person with learning disability is heard, and we'll take that individual intensive approach with families who are struggling through this and look at their individual situation and work a way forward with them. We always make sure that our families are well informed about the council's complaints process as well.
I think that is reassuring. These are very difficult choices for families, let alone for the service. And we know we must always be person-centred in the way we make these decisions. Councillor Maybe.
Thank you, Leader. You did touch on this already, but I wondered if you could explain a little bit more. Without Budden Crescent, what are the arrangements for accessing emergency respite care or short notice respite care? Thanks.
Please, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Maybe. So in response to the questions around the access to emergency respite, so the existing options that we have, so shared lives, direct payments, residential respite, they all have the capacity to provide a placement in an emergency situation as well as being used for planned care. And our starting point for these sorts of situations is always with the family. So we'd always want to get a sense of a contingency plan should an emergency arise when we're working with a family around their care and support needs. And our first point of call for any emergency situation would be to go to the service that the person already receives their respite through. So if they have a shared lives carer in an emergency situation, we would ask that shared life carer to provide in an emergency. That would be our first point of call. Now, because it's an emergency, that's not always going to be a route that we can follow. So one of the things that we've been doing over the last couple of years and continuing to do now is to commission a bed from Centrica, which is Monmouthshire's sole use. So that's sole use for planned respite, but it's not used all the time, so that sometimes is available in an unplanned emergency situation. People are fairly flexible in my experience around emergencies as well. So if, for example, somebody's planned respite needs to be shifted a bit to accommodate somebody's emergency, people are fairly flexible with that. I mean, and we always have and will continue to do so in an emergency situation, go back out and see over some of our provider agencies from a residential point of view, what's available and who can support in that particular situation. Like I say, the providers that we work with do tend to be very flexible. It's well known that, you know, emergencies do arise, and that it's you know, people do try and step in. The other thing that we'd like to try and just look at in a little bit more detail moving forward is the option of respite at home. And that sometimes in an emergency situation actually can provide a really good choice. It means less disruption for the person who is cared for. And that can often be provided through, for example, a direct payment or, through a direct payment. So did I cover everything there? Yes, I think so. So yeah, that's our approach to emergencies.
Thanks.
You were wanting to talk.
Yes,
Councillor
please, thank
Sandals.
you. In the presentation, it's recognised that there are particular challenges with ensuring that there's a good range of respite options for people with more complex needs and obviously wheelchair users. What steps are being taken, please, to ensure that these options are expanded for these people?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Sanders. I think that's important, and we do, you know, that's the heart of this recommendation is, although we, you know, on the surface it might look, we a lot of the debate, particularly outside of the meetings, has been about the closure of Budden Crescent as a particular aspect of our provision of respite care. Actually, the thrust of this paper is about how we expand and develop that range of options for respite care, particularly for those that are unable to receive them. So I think it's a really important point, because I think it comes to the heart of this proposal. So maybe I could hand over to Jane again, just to sort of expand on that and talk about some of the specifics about how we're developing on, or how we intend to develop those other options.
Yes, certainly. Yeah, just to reiterate that, you know, there are people with wheelchair users and complex needs who already access respite, but we do recognise that this is an area that we want to expand, make sure that same range of choice and options are available to people with different levels of need. Some of the specific things that we would like to do is to work again in partnership with Shared Lives. We are a member of the management board as a council, so that we can do some targeted recruitment for carers, particularly those who are able to provide placement to people with wheelchair users, or who are able to respond to people who may have like challenging behaviours, or maybe slightly higher level of need. And we'd be looking into the possibility of supporting carers to make home adaptations if that was required. So, you know, there's quite a bit to explore there in partnership with Shared Lives, and this is something that we'd be doing with other local authorities who also struggle for these sorts of placements through Shared Lives. We supported holidays took a bit of a nosedive during the pandemic for obvious reasons, but they are coming back into their own, and we've got a good range that we already work with. So we'd like to work again in partnership with them to really consider, like, what is your offer, and have you thought about just expanding the offer for people with perhaps more complex needs? So a bit of proactive work there. Again, the development of respite at home. And at the moment, all of the residential placements that we commission for respite are fully wheelchair available, fully wheelchair accessible, and can deal with higher level care needs. But just on a regional footprint, we'll be looking to really team up with the rest of the local authorities in Gwent, just to make sure that we've got the right level of provision shared, you know, between us all, and that therefore offers the maximum range of sort of choice of different residential options for people.
Thank you, that's really helpful. Thanks.
Is there any more questions coming up? Any online? Then I'll open it up to Councillor John and Councillor Taylor. Councillor Taylor, I believe you have a couple of questions you want to ask.
Good afternoon. Yes, I do indeed have to say, having listened to, having read the papers, watched the scrutiny committee, heard Councillor Crook's comments, and also heard the discussion there. A lot of the discussion around how, my question, which is how you're going to support those that require respite where they have in both planned and unplanned placements, where there are wheelchair users or where they have complex needs, does seem to be described in the future tense rather than something that's accessible now. And so I have to say that I've heard what you've said to date, but I think that it would be really helpful for people, particularly those that have expressed concerns about this, including the Scrutiny Committee, to understand what that actually means. And sorry, having heard Jane's response around, people are prepared to move their respite. Clearly, that's not always possible, is it? So I have to say, it doesn't sound terribly convincing. It'd be really helpful to hear something a bit more convincing about our ability to provide now. Thank you.
I'll just come in there first. I think, as Jane said, the people who are the adults with learning disabilities who are being cared for into the respite service, those with complex needs, those who are wheelchair users, are already receiving respite. So it's not that they don't receive it, they're already receiving respite, whether it's at Centrica House or whether it's through some of the other options that are available. What we're saying is we want to expand the choice that those people have, because the choice they've got is fairly limited at this stage, and we want to be able to expand that choice. But part of as you will very well appreciate, part of the challenges of that is that while we're still running Budden Crescent, and with the financial cost of that, is that we don't necessarily have the capacity to do that expansion. So that's why we're looking at reviewing the service overall, to actually give us that opportunity to refocus, provide greater choice, but at the same time be more cost effective in what we're doing. So I think that's the sort of the top level answer I'd have. I don't know whether you want to add any more to that, Jane, but I think you've already gone through some of the aspects of how we're going to work with shared lives, how we're going to work with supported holidays, and also how we're going to develop the in-house respite option, the at-home respite option. So I think you've gone through those in fair detail. I don't know if there's anything more you want to add in response to Councillor Taylor's comments, but other than recognising, we recognise that those options are limited at the moment. That's why we want to do something about it.
Councillor Chandler, no, I think that's fine. It is just to reiterate that those residential options and other options are already there. This is about expanding choice for wheelchair users and those with more higher level needs.
Councillor Taylor, you had a second question you wanted to put to Councillor.
Yes, thank you. So again, really, it would seem that there is still a lot more exploring of alternatives to do. For example, you talked about adaptions in carers who provide shared lives, opportunities, homes. Well, that's clearly a longer term aspiration. So yes, the question was really, have we, during the period, which has been quite lengthy, have we really explored all the alternatives to date to be able to come to an informed decision and be able to particularly provide for that emergency unplanned care, and also in the way that clearly in the responses and the response from Scrutiny Committee that people have asked for now?
I think we have. I mean, in terms of exploring options, I mean, I think the scrutiny process has been really useful, because I think it really has challenged us to make sure that we have explored all of those options. So, I welcome that scrutiny process and the other engagement that we've had with stakeholders. And we have gone back and we have taken every one of those, and in particular, we have looked at that challenge about, would it be more viable to run a more reduced level of provision at Budden Crescent in order to keep that facility open? and look at maybe different models of operating it. And I think that has been really useful to have that challenge. At the end of the day, though, having looked at all those options, both in terms of what it would mean, in terms of the actual service that we provide, and you know, that someone going into a residential respite option, if they're the only person in a home and don't have any interaction with other users, actually isn't providing the service for that adult that's being cared for. But also financially, as we talked about earlier, the unit costs are still significantly higher and don't represent good value for money for what we could get from commissioning a better service or more complete service from other providers. So I think, you know, at the end of the day, I've come to the conclusion that, you know, having really interrogated all those options that we've been challenged to look for, I don't feel able to recommend any alternative than what we have on the table. And, you know, as I said right at the very beginning, it is a difficult choice. And we know there are some people that Budden Crescent is their preferred place where they want their loved one to stay while they get respite. But we are making sure that we are providing alternatives that may not be their first choice, but are viable alternatives that can use that, and also enable us to expand the service for other families who want alternatives, and to make sure those alternatives are available. So it's been a useful process, scrutiny. It's been challenging, but I welcomed it. But at the end of the day, I haven't been able to see any alternative that is better than what we're putting forward on the table. So I hope that's a satisfactory response, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. And
question.
yes, sorry. And finally, it's really good to hear Cabinet talking about how they value the scrutiny, the work of scrutiny committees. The report mentions the prospect of redundancies, which clearly must be very disconcerting for staff should Budden Crescent be recommended for closure. What are your expectations at the present time, and what would you anticipate, or what is your calculation of the costs potentially involved there? Thank you.
Can I hand over to Jane Rogers to answer that question?
Certainly, Councillor Chandler. I mean, it is disconcerting, but we'd be working very much in line with our employment protection policy. So, you know, redundancies are always that last resort, and we'd be working individually through individual conversations and HR processes to look at suitable alternative employment. That is a matter for individual discussions, and until that, you know, those processes have been gone through and that time comes, we just won't know the actual costs. It really will depend on that HR process, and I really wouldn't want to provide an actual figure at this point. But that said, we have looked at what some of the scenarios might be, and those are being taken forward and factored in with our financial planning. But at the moment, we're not in that, we're not at that point in discussion with individuals. Of course, they're aware of what's happening. They've been part of the process, but we're at the very early stages, not even reached the very early stages of the HR processes that we would need to go through with each individual.
Thank you very much, Councillor Taylor. Councillor John, you have some questions you want to ask too.
I do. Thank you, Leader. Good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, can I thank Councillor Chandler and Jane Rogers for the presentation? And I absolutely agree that I thought it was a really interesting discussion at committee, and I thought that was really useful. I appreciate that Budden Crescent is part of a range of respite options, but it does feel that were it not for the pressures on the council finances, that this decision about Budden Crescent would be different. It does feel that it's a financially led decision rather than what's purely in the best interests of carers and those who are cared for, and that we're now looking at closure rather than trying to increase the capacity to make it more financially viable. But I wanted to ask specifically about the evidence base for this decision. And considering that only one individual consultee supported the closure of Budden Crescent, how can you reassure the public that this was a meaningful consultation and that the public had been listened to?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor John. I mean, I think just in terms of your sort of opening remarks, you know, I'm not going to shy away from the fact that looking at value for money in the finances, particularly in the current financial climate for local authorities, is a part of our decision-making process. I'm not going to shy away from that, and I don't think you would want us to.
No.
But it's not. I wouldn't say that it was primarily financially driven. I think it's the whole purpose of this review was driven by the changing patterns of demand that was seen before the pandemic, and there were changes in demand and demands that were maybe not able to meet because of some of the restrictions. So that's what drove the process. But clearly, yeah, finances and value for money is definitely part of our consideration. Absolutely. In terms of the consultation process, I think I'll hand over to Jane Rogers to answer that part of the question, if I may.
Thank you. I mean, we did go to quite concerted efforts really to make sure that we did meaningfully involve people. And I said before that we went through two consultation periods. The first one didn't elicit the response that we needed, and then we refined our approaches and undertook a second period of consultation. We, you know, offered a range of different ways that people could provide their views, you know, various different surveys, individual meetings, and obviously being involved in the scrutiny meeting and committee itself. We compiled one of the appendices to the report to show the outcomes of the survey, actually, and just looking at that specifically, we surveyed the people who were either users of respite or who may well be users of respite in the future, so those young people going through transition. We had 18 respondents to the survey, and I totally acknowledge that when we asked the question directly about should we stop providing the service at Budden Crescent, 11 of those respondents either disagreed or partially disagreed or partially disagreed. But when we asked them about the, you know, should we be looking at expanding the range of residential options to provide a sort of greater choice, then that was a more mixed response. And I mean, just to reiterate, if from a service point of view, if we were able to provide everything that people wanted, you know, we would be in a very different situation than we are now. So we've had to use some of our wider data and wider information that came through the review to try to reach valid, you know, the best conclusions that we could. But I don't think that takes away from the fact that we haven't, I don't think that says that we haven't meaningfully listened, engaged with people. I think we've gone to great lengths, and rightly so, to really make sure that the people who are most affected by these decisions have had that voice and have had a number of opportunities to express their feelings. And like we said, you know, through that, there does remain a few families, small numbers, who still feel, you know, that we're not providing respite in the way that they would want, and we are endeavouring to put in place an individual social work response to those families.
Councillor John, I believe you have a question.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. And you know, absolutely, I understand that pressures of ensuring value for money and delivering the best possible services within the resources we have is a real challenge. I wanted to ask about that change in demand that you just referred to, Jane, because the figures are quite striking pre and post pandemic, and you know, I certainly haven't seen any evidence that the council has done anything to suppress uptake of Budden Crescent. But I also haven't seen evidence of sort of concerted efforts to try to increase the use of it, to try to ensure that we are making maximum use of that resource. So do you have confidence that there aren't those in need out there who perhaps are missing out on the support that perhaps Budden Crescent could have provided? Is that question clear, or do you want me to reword it? Sorry if that was a bit rambling.
No, it's okay, Councillor John. I understand what you're saying, because I think, you know, it is a question that's come up in scrutiny about the changing patterns of demand, and it's also come up from other stakeholders talking about this. So I think, you know, I mean, and I'll probably hand over to Jane in a minute just to sort of expand a little bit on this. But as we've said, those changing patterns of demand were evident for some time. When in 2011, when we stopped having a one-size-fits-all, everybody just goes to Budden Crescent type of respite service, into actually providing choice, automatically people started to take up those other choices. Is that those people that were receiving, that were going into care, were saying, actually, you know, I would prefer to go on a short break somewhere else rather than just go to a residential home where I may or may not be on my own. And all the other options that are available, and the opportunity to stay in somebody else's home through shared lives, all of those became much more attractive, as is also the option of direct payments, where people take complete control over their respite by actually having a direct payment from us, where they then use that to pay for their own respite provision. So all of those automatically became more popular, so that suppressed some demand straight away. And then there were other factors as well, that of course many of the people that were being cared for by their families, some of those moved into independent supported living. So actually they weren't being cared for by families, so those families had less need for respite. So, you know, there are a number of factors that we've set out in the report that changed that demand. Clearly the pandemic has impacted on all of that, and things haven't still gone back to as they were before the pandemic, but the overall patterns still seem to be broadly similar, I would say, having looked at that data. So I think that's what I'd say about the trends. In terms of how do we ensure that everybody's getting the support they need? Well, I think, as James said earlier, everybody has a social worker, everybody has a care needs assessment. So they've all had an assessed need of what respite care is needed. They're all aware of what all the range of options are, and then they work with their social worker to identify what's the best option for them. So nobody's being left behind here. People are making choices, and some people are making choices not to access respite because they feel they don't need it. Others are choosing the range of options that are available. And as we move further away from the pandemic, we anticipate that more people are going to choose those options. But I think, you know, that's where we're at the moment. Everybody has that assessment, everybody has that social worker, and is aware of what's available. Do you want to add anything to that, Jane? No, I think that probably, hopefully, says it all. So
thank you.
That is a fairly comprehensive answer. Thanks very much, Councillor Chandler. That concludes the discussion on this particular item. And I'm glad it's been as wide-ranging as it has, because this is an important decision for the council. It's also a very important decision for the users now and the future users. And I think we need to have confidence that the decisions that we're making with regards to the recommendations from the report are the right one to allow us to move forward in exceptionally challenging times, as Jane and Councillor Chandler touched on, for all local authorities, not just in Wales but in the UK, of how we continue to ensure that people who are the carers, as well as the most vulnerable of our population, get the support they need, and they feel that their needs are met under those circumstances. So while the recommendation is we should accept approve the findings of the Respite Opportunity Service Review and the recommendations as set out in that review, I was glad that Councillor Chandler actually read them out for the record, so that we're aware what we're agreeing to. Can I just make Cabinet aware that I'm going to ask you one by one on this because it is so important. So obviously, Councillor Chandler, you're recommending it to us. Councillor Maybe. The recommendation is that we consider the findings and we approve all the review recommendations.
Yes, you have my approval. Thank you.
Councillor Garrick. I can lip read, perhaps.
Sorry, I forgot my microphone was above my head there. Yes, I approve.
Councillor Sandals.
I approve.
Councillor Crowfoot. I approve too. Thank you, Councillor Chandler. Thank you,
Thanks, Leader.
Jane
Thanks, Jane.
Rogers. So the next item, a very different one, and is actually me. So you'll watch me chair while presenting. I'll just put my glasses on. The next item is about the cross-border marches presentation. And for those of you who glue yourself to Radio Wales of a morning, I was on the radio last Thursday talking about this. It's something that I'm really pleased about, and I'm delighted to bring this to Cabinet. It's groundbreaking for many reasons. It's something that has been in development since the summer of last year, since very early when we took over as the administration. And a driving force for this has been our desire to strengthen our existing partnerships. And as a council, we're known for the depth of our partnerships, developed over decades, really, and to forge new collaborations which will complement and support the principles and our objectives within our community and corporate plan. And to remind you all, that's to do with our commitment to tackle inequalities, to address the nature and climate emergency, to always where we can work in partnership, and always where we can to work with our communities across our county. Why? Why is this so important? Because these are huge challenges. The challenges of inequalities is not just Monmouthshire. It's something that has been steadily growing since the 1980s and has accelerated over the last 5 years or so. The challenge of nature and the environment is at crisis point, as we know. We've only got to see what's been happening over the last 2 summers to realise just how it's impacting on us in Monmouthshire, but the whole globe. And the challenges we face as a consequence of years of austerity, of the cost of living crisis, as a rural county, the connectivity, the digital connectivity, the transport, the nature and climate adaptations that we need to make, but we cannot make in isolation. We can work so much better with our friends along the borders of the marches, which is an ancient border, very permeable. There's flows going back and forth all the time. Where I live in Abergavenny, people are taking the train into Abergavenny for work and education, or they're taking the train even further. They're crossing the border into Herefordshire. We have logistics, we have health. There's so much that is already going on around hospitality and tourism on a daily basis that it's a natural move to bring ourselves together around a common purpose. And one of the reasons that this timing was so good is because it spoke to our ability to leverage more investment into the union, into the region, post-Brexit, post-EU, and from the UK government as signalling that they wanted a change in the way that they invested into rural communities, and they were particularly interested in investing in partnerships across rural communities. So it's not just a cultural desire because we recognise we have so much in common. It's also a very practical and economic desire that we work together. And it's the first time that this has happened. The planned collaboration will cover a population of more than 737,000 and approximately, I feel like I'm reading from a geography book, but you know, it helps, 1,140,000 hectares. In big term, that straggles about 80% of the English and Welsh border. So that's huge, absolutely huge. But when you think about the rivers that are running through it, when we're thinking about river health, when you think about our common agriculture and horticultural industries, and also the logistics and transport networks, it's hugely exciting. It's hugely exciting that we plan to join forces to apply for the funding that will come through from the UK government on major projects and from other places that will benefit the collective region. So, what will the partnership do? We will work with Hereford, with Powys, with Shropshire to establish areas where there is mutual benefit and added value. And at the top of this is the rural economy and a green, thriving Marches, which speaks already to the wellbeing goals of the council that are based on the Wellbeing and Future Generation Act, which is central to all council in Wales. And it talks in particular to our community, the objectives within our community and corporate plan. So the areas across border shared interests are likely to include transport, skills, housing, particularly affordable housing and social housing, alongside energy, climate change and digital connectivity. In our cases, it already builds on the work that we're doing in the Y Commission, for example, which again is where Hereford, Powys and ourselves have come together on an area of mutual interest. I'd just like to draw your attention, which is in the report, on the objectives. Objective 1 is to do with the data, evidence and research so that we can leverage joint intelligence and research expertise. Why? Well, it's about the quality of life of our rural cross-border communities, but actually more importantly on that, the amount of evidence that we need to really make convincing, very targeted, of the moment decisions is really difficult to analyse alone. We already have some partnerships around this through Gwent and through other partnerships. To be able to work with our colleagues in England to get those flow data analytics is really going to benefit us in the way we work internally, but also how we work in partnership. Secondly is nature, energy and climate adaptation. So where can we go for at-scale opportunities? Where can we work in terms of our commitments to nature-friendly agriculture, for example, for ensuring that we can begin to turn the curve on river health? We absolutely know we can't do that on our own. How do we work so that we share good practice around adaptation to climate change and around energy? Objective 3 is transport and digital transformation. So how do we improve that rural connectivity to level up access not only to jobs, but also to education, and also how those cross-border flows can be accelerated in ways that it can support green growth and it can support our rural economies. Objective 4 is about sustainable communities, which absolutely talks to the principles of this council, working together on the development of how we build that resilience to a very changing environment, but also we're living in very uncertain times. That creating that social network, that social infrastructure, which realise that growth and sustainability of the rural economy supports our residents and the users of our whole geography. Food, rural development and visitor economy is objective 5. For very obvious reasons, for all of us across the marches, these are key part of not just our economy, but our identity. Food in Monmouthshire, we are a place for destination. So is Herefordshire, actually. So is Paris. There is so much we can do around this, because one of the missing middles for a lot of our work around hospitality, around rural development and food, is to do with logistics and storage. We can do so much together that would be impossible in the current climate to do on our own. The last is our government and strategic relations. We know as rural counties that very often our voice has not been heard. It's been very, the UK, and I would say the Welsh Government as well, has been very urban orientated. There's a growing change. We're pushing at an open door. Better we push together both sides of the border, so we get those common challenges as well as those common opportunities that are presented with us as rural areas. So what's different about this to the other partnerships we're in, like Cardiff City Region, for example? Well, one of the things I find very refreshing about this is not government directed. There's not going to be a legal entity. This is not, there's no formal government structure. Why? Because we have actually come together where we can add value to what we are doing already, where we have mutual interests, and we can work jointly on areas that can leverage better investment, but also allow for better learning and sharing of good practice and emerging practice. And there's nothing stopping us from working with other authorities or partners now in the future, but we can also leave the partnership if it's not working for us. So built into the memorandum of understanding, which is in the pack, is that very understanding that should we choose to leave, we can do, and there are break points in reviewing. The first will be in 6 months' time. There's a further one from that in 18 months. If it's not meeting our needs as a council, we walk away. But we also make sure that we invest the time and commitment that we can build on the potential we think that's showing to us. We will continue to deliver services to residents and businesses in the normal way. It's only where we can get that mutual benefit. And our work within the Y Commission on River Health, which Councillor Maybe has been leading, has shown how it works, but also how we can use our voice to challenge as well as contribute, and how our voice can be amplified because we are working across the whole of our region around the Y. We intend as leaders to meet formally every quarter. They'll be held mostly online, but we will meet once a year for the annual report. Our officers will meet more regularly, largely online. It's not anticipated that these meetings will be open to the public, but minutes will be published in the normal way. Where we are at the moment, it is only early days. We've just launched. We've come together to work out where we're likely to work. Our objectives is we're starting to talk to government. We're hoping to increase investment and accelerate delivery of key infrastructure projects, potentially unblocking millions of pounds, and very early discussions across the border in England with the UK government are very encouraging for us. We'll continue to work in this level. When we do leverage funds, we'll be open and transparent about what funding is allocated and how it will be spent, where it will be spent, and how it will benefit Monmouthshire. What I anticipate, and it's always good to have a vision, I believe, is that we'll start to see a physical difference with some of our projects, and we'll also benefit from an improved quality of living and a more vibrant, thriving area that's based on green and equality and fair principles. So, do you have any comments or questions you'd like to ask me? It is generally very, very straightforward. Councillor Grocott.
Thank you, Leader. It's a comment rather than a question. It seems to me that rivers flow from county to county, and that to try to address the huge problems of river pollution, if that was the only reason why we wanted to set up an organisation like that, that in itself would be a good enough reason. We really are facing a catastrophe with our river systems right along the borders of England and Wales. And I wish this new organisation all the very best. And I certainly hope that they're in a position to actually start to get a handle on this now.
I think that's very true. In Monmouthshire, as you know, we have the Usk, we have the tributaries, we also have the Wye running through us. Shropshire has a Severn. We have very common interests. We also, along all the borders, we have farms that straddle them. We have farmers that straddle into Herefordshire. I was talking to one the other day, who part of his farm is in Herefordshire and part of the farm is in this side of the border. But that's true also in Powys, and it's also true in Shropshire and Herefordshire. So I would agree with you there. But it's more than that, actually. It's so that we can leverage the huge amount of skills, ambition, of entrepreneurship that straddles the marches, and that we can find common purpose to really build on what is an ancient identity. Councillor Maybe.
Thank you, Leader. I won't start talking about rivers because I could go on a bit too long about that, but I wanted to ask something slightly differently. I live just 3 miles from the border with Herefordshire, and I also used to commute into Gloucestershire for work. So I relate very strongly to what we've been talking about and the importance of these areas that have a lot in common, market towns, rural areas. And I think, you know, the administrative boundaries sometimes seem like an unnecessary barrier for people in terms of their travel to work, to leisure, etc. But one thing that struck me was the absence of Gloucestershire. So I just wondered what possibilities there were going forward for other authorities to join the partnership, and whether this is you know, it's anticipated that this will be explored. Thank you.
Good question, Councillor Maybe. Absolutely. We needed to start somewhere. However, you're absolutely right in terms of where we have shared and common interests. And there have been discussions with Gloucestershire, as there has been with the Forest of Dean and Telford and Wrexham, who are right up at the top of the borders. At this stage, which for me is confirmation that this is really about, we want to, if you want to join, it's because you really want to join. Not at this moment, they're still thinking about it, but the door will never be closed. But thank you. I saw your hand go up there.
No, that's thank you. I mean, I again, like Councillor Grocott, it's partly a comment, but also there's also a question, because I think as a councillor representing a very rural very rural ward in Monmouthshire, I really value the opportunity to actually get more sharing of ideas and expertise and developing joint plans with other rural councils, because I think, you know, as you've said, rural areas have not necessarily had the attention that they deserve, I think, in the past from any of our governments. So I think it's good that we've got that opportunity to have that exchange, but also then to have that joint voice. So I definitely support that. And looking at some of the challenges that we face as a council in terms of delivering services in rural areas, I think, again, it's going to be really important that we are developing jointly what best practice looks like in those areas. So I look forward to this partnership developing over the years ahead. I suppose my question, though, and I have to say this on behalf of residents, is could you just clarify a little bit more about the resource implications both in terms of financial costs, but also officer time that's involved in this partnership?
Absolutely, and that is an important question. Given the situation all councils face at the moment. Let's start with the taxpayer. Actually, there is no hidden cost or extra cost because this is a mutual engagement. It's where we are in terms of financial costs. There are none at the moment, and it's something that we will keep reviewing. That may change as projects develop, but we would hope the financial, well, not even hope, what we're aiming for, the financial flows will be into, not going out of, and we need to monitor that, and will do. And that is a concern of all the councils that are in the partnership at the moment. Unlike any other partnership, it doesn't commit us to giving any financial commitment at all, and we don't intend for that commitment to be made so. It comes back to the point that we've determined not to be a legal entity, and therefore are not governed in that way. In terms of officer time, that also needs to be monitored. At the moment, it's part of our partnership work and has not added to any burden, and we don't expect it to do. Much of the work that's going on around rivers, for example, is already factored into business plans, but so is the work that we want to do around food and agriculture, digital, etc. We will monitor that, because as we get investment in financial flows coming into this area, that undoubtedly will have an impact on officer time. And we need to factor that in. It's sure it doesn't take away from our core business, which is central to what we do. This is to enhance, complement, and potentially unlock funds that we are unlikely to get without being in collaboration and partnership. So I think as we went into this, we were confident at the moment. There are negative risks, but you always have to monitor this, don't you? Did I see a hand up, Councillor Garrett?
Yes, but it turns out my colleagues are very interested in resources as well, so I think we've covered it. Thank you.
That's great. And I always say to you, Councillor Garrett, we all have to be interested in resources at this time. In that case, I'll move to the recommendation. I won't read them out. There's 4 of them which cover our approval of the establishment of the Marches Partnership, that we recognise the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding. We support the development of this partnership, and you delegate to myself and the Chief Executive, along with the Chief Officer for Communities and Place, to proceed with this. Are we all in agreement? Can we have a show of hands, please?
Yes.
Is that figure of approval? Thanks very much. Did you get that, Nick?
Yep.
Thank you. I'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which I can see there's a deal of interest. The proposed home to school transport policy 2024 to 25, which we have a statutory duty. Councillor Goycott, over to you.
Thank you, Leader. Before I get into the nitty-gritty of what I'd like to say, I'd like to break with tradition almost, and put on record my thanks to the team of officers that have helped to develop this this and the new draft policy. And I'd also like to thank, not just because she's here tonight as an observer, but I'd like to thank you, Councillor, for your help and contribution. And I think that...
For the record, Councillor Garrett, I think you're referring to Councillor Brown?
Yes, I forget the camera doesn't move around in here. Councillor Louise Brown, thank you very much for bringing your forensic brain to this. I think that's the benefit that you've brought. And it does mean that this is a good example of officers and a cabinet member and a member of the council working together as a team. And I have to say that in my mind, that's one of the things that makes Monmouthshire a special place. And certainly in terms of the officers involved, over the last few days, they have worked so incredibly hard because, of course, this is the first week of the new school year, and they have been sorting out all the glitches in the system of getting our children to school for the start of the new school year, as well as finalising this report, which will set the policy for next school year. So having said that, this report and the thinking behind it has gone on really till the 23rd hour and the 59th minute. The last slight tweaks were actually made last night. So I hope that members have looked at the report as of today, because that's what we're talking about. And I think, again, that's a reflection of the commitment of officers, that particularly around the issue of transport to faith schools, we have listened to so many viewpoints, and we have tried so hard to listen particularly to the diocesan education reps, because clearly the Roman Catholic Church and the Church in Wales are those denominations that have got schools in Monmouthshire who are most affected. But of course, there does come a point where you have to say, we have listened and listened and listened. And at times you almost feel that if you took another step, you'd end up back where you started. So we have tried our hardest to bring in a whole raft of opinions. And this consultation has gone on over the whole of the summer period. The report presented to Cabinet today contains the proposed changes to the home to school transport policy for the academic year that starts September 2024, next September. The legislation places a duty on us to review our transport policy on an annual basis. And that policy now needs to be confirmed by the 1st of October, ready for application for parents who wish to apply for their children's transport for next September. The report and policy have been subject to public consultation and scrutiny consideration. And I'd like to thank John Crook, as chair of the People Committee, for sending forward some detailed recommendations from his committee, and members of Cabinet will see where we have actually addressed the issues raised by scrutiny in this report. It's worth me highlighting a few of the key points raised in the report, but I certainly don't propose to cover them all. In this administration, we are supportive of the Welsh Government's hierarchy of travel strategy and its ambition. So this policy is looking to adopt the transport hierarchy when considering home to school transport. This policy therefore supports the reduction of home to school commissioned transport and the maintenance of public services within Monmouthshire, and aligns with the corporate and community plan. We are keen to see more safe walking routes being established and have allocated capital money to this in this year to improve the infrastructure and enable more of our learners to walk to school where it is safe to do so. However, where we are able to make these improvements and a learner would then not be entitled to the free transport, the learner will still be able to access transport for this academic year to enable them to make any plans and prepare for the change should the transport eventually be withdrawn. If this policy is agreed today, it's important that I reiterate that learners who are already in receipt of free transport will continue to receive it unless a walking route is made available. Finally, I'd like to address the area that's received the most significant volume of response, and that's free transport for faith learners and providing clarification in the drafting of the policy. The provision of free home to school transport to faith schools is not a statutory responsibility, but local authorities can choose to provide discretionary transport based on their defined eligibility criteria. The proposed amendments to the eligibility criteria for learners attending faith schools is designed to ensure that discretionary free transport continues to be made available for those learners who meet the distance eligibility criteria and the learner being able to meet the faith criteria contained in their chosen school's oversubscription criteria, because in many cases it is the school itself who will admit a child. If, however, a parent has applied parental preference and selected the school for non-faith reasons, they will not be able to access free home to school transport unless the school is either their nearest suitable or the catchment school. I'd like to ask the Cabinet to support the proposal set out in the report, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Oh, thank you, Councillor Grocott. We know how important that we really do consult on this. We also know how important that the policy is clear. And I'm really pleased to hear that you and the officers went back and forth, and really took account of the different views that were coming in. As you pointed out, when it comes down to it, decisions have to be made. And we have a statutory obligation to make this decision, I believe, before October the 4th.
The first, it has to be published on or before the 1st of October.
And I do think that is really important, because no policy is worse for our learners than a policy in what we've been doing with making sure that tweaking, we get it as near as possible. Councillor Maybe.
Thanks. It's not a question, I'm afraid it's more of a comment, but I really just wanted to say that from my perspective with transport strategy in my portfolio, I'm really pleased with where we've got to with this, because it really does endorse and support our broader approach to transport, which in turn does align very closely with the National Transport Strategy Llwybr Newydd, because it really does encourage and help us both to maintain public transport services, but also active travel, wherever there are safe routes. It encourages kids to walk or wheel to school, which in turn, it's not just health benefits, it's reduction in carbon emissions, air pollution, congestion, noise. It's really multiple benefits. So I'm really pleased with where we've managed to get to with this. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Maybe. Councillor Chandler.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Grocott. I mean, obviously, this is a very comprehensive report, and it's good that you've focused on that. And I think you focused a lot on the criteria around people accessing faith schools, which is important. But I'd like to draw you to the issue around post-16 travel more generally. And I've had communication from residents in my ward. So my ward, as you're aware, is a ward of Llantylia Cresceni. It's a rural ward. There are no public buses in that ward at all. It is very rural and challenging to reach school. And I've been contacted by a parent who lives in the ward, whose child attended Monmouth Comp, who's passed her GCSEs outstandingly and wants to continue at Monmouth Comp in the sixth form, but actually hasn't been able to get a place for concessionary transport. And her mother, being an NHS nurse, is now facing a dilemma of how can she either give up her work in order to transport her child, or her child is unable to go to school. That's one example, and I know just through having this sort of correspondence more generally that this is not an isolated example of that uncertainty and anxiety that is caused for people that are entering sixth form that have not got a guaranteed place on a school bus, even if they're willing to pay for it. I wondered whether you could respond on that more generally in terms of those rural residents accessing post-16 education, not just specifically to do with faith schools or out of or Welsh language schools.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Chandler. I think officers have received several letters on this issue this week. I know I have had quite a few from students as well as their parents, and I'm aware that it is a big issue. We're aware, because of the volume, that it is a big issue. There is no statutory duty on Monmouthshire County Council to provide free transport for post-16 learners. Indeed, some authorities, I believe, don't provide free transport. Post-16 learners have the opportunity to apply for concessionary travel in Monmouthshire, and that is very heavily subsidised. So it certainly is way below the real cost of the transport. But of course, it is dependent on availability. We can hook into routes to school, and in most cases, we're able to do that. We're currently working through all the submitted applications to enable us to meet our statutory duties for primary and secondary learners, because there will always be some parents who wait till the start of term and realise they had forgotten to apply for transport for their child. And because we have a legal duty to get their children to school, over the last couple of days, that's where our efforts have been. In the application for post-16 travel, it is made clear to pupils and parents that there is a 2-week delay before post-16 transport is looked at, because we do have to sort out our legal responsibilities. And at the end of those 10 days, the first 2 weeks of the new school term, we will look at the routes, and the vast majority of post-16 students, we have traditionally been able to help and support. There is no change this year, and so I see no change in that level of support continuing.
Thank you, Councillor.
Oh, Councillor Sandals, I saw your hand.
I'm just going to admit here, okay, that I was one of those people who left it really late last year. Okay, not this year. It's all gone. But yes, but
we all have an opportunity to redeem ourselves.
And if I could just make a comment on, I'd just like to say I welcome the changes for many of the reasons you've already noted. I believe you brought clarity to the eligibility criteria for faith schools, and I think it also shows our commitment to provide travel to faith and Welsh medium schools, obviously providing the eligibility criteria are met. So, you know, well done, and I can see all the hard work that you've all put into it. So thanks, everybody.
Do we have any more questions? In that case, I'm going to move to recommendations. There is. Richard, I think. Oh, I'm sorry, Richard. I'm sorry, Councillor John. That's very remiss of me.
That's okay.
You called me up on that one.
No problem. Thank you. Well,
what's your question?
Thank you. Well, firstly, can I thank the cabinet member for his generosity in accepting my apology for losing my rag with him and saying some things that I shouldn't have done last week, and I'm happy to repeat that apology here today. Turning to the report, I'm really grateful to you for the amendments you've adopted from Councillor Brown's really forensic scrutiny, and I really am grateful for that. Councillor Chandler alluded to this a moment ago, but I didn't hear many reassurances, Councillor Grocott, about some of the frustrations that I know many of us have had in our inboxes over the last few days about the start to the academic year, which I know has been difficult for some families who haven't received the information that they needed for their children to get on school transport. So I wonder if you could say something about that. I do appreciate there were some factors outside the council's control. But I also wonder what reassurances you can give about the in the report, the plan for children to be travelling on public buses, and what reassurances can you give to families that these services are going to be both reliable and absolutely critically that they will be safe for those passengers, please, for the children on those buses?
Thank you, Councillor John. I believe there's an old saying that you should never let the sun go down on your anger. I look forward to both of us being able to go forward in a constructive way to get the best for the people of Monmouthshire. And I will certainly do my best, even when I think you're
Likewise. Likewise.
But,
every day.
You've actually sneaked in two questions for the price of one there, which...
well spotted, Councillor Grocott is also forensic.
The first question, I think, relates primarily to very specific difficulties we've had that I think focus in the Usk Raglan area. And I didn't mention it when I was congratulating the officers for the work they've done, but I think one of the big things is that literally with a week or so to go until the start of term, one of our big traditional contractors decided they were going to cease trading and handed back to the authority all of the contract that they had been awarded. And this with a week to go to the start of the new term. I know that officers in the transport unit, and let me name them, Deborah Hill-Howells and Becky Pritchard, have on occasions been working till 1 o'clock in the morning to get transport in place for the 1st of September. And by and large, they succeeded in doing that. It was a huge amount of work they put in. I know there may have been 1 or 2 cases where parents didn't know where the stop was or what time exactly. But in the enormity of the problem that they were faced with, literally at the last minute, I think they've done a remarkable job. Your second question was about safety on public routes. And indeed, that was one area where quite a few people raised disquiet. The council has for many years used public services, and at King Henry VIII, for example, many children who come down from the Pontrilas area through the Mardy to Abergavenny, or who come down the Clydach Gorge from the heads of the valleys, have for many years now used public service buses with no difficulty at all. And many authorities use public services. And indeed, when I was a chief officer, rather than a member of the cabinet in an authority, we moved very heavily, and I'm talking 20 years ago now, to the use of public services. And these have the benefits not only of ensuring transport to school for children, but also at a time when many of our bus routes in Wales are under direct threat. It is a very effective way of providing support that enables largely rural communities to retain a bus service. So the council has and continues to use public bus service for secondary learners. And let me emphasise that no primary age pupils will be expected to use a service bus. The same protocols that govern safeguarding rely equally to public service vehicles, and all drivers will have had a DBS check. There is CCTV on the vehicles, and we acknowledge that traffic conditions can impact on the punctuality of buses, but that would apply to any bus. And so if a bus is late to school and it's a service bus, the same delays will have affected a bus specifically contracted by the Education Department. Service operators have been contacted and they have worked with Monmouthshire's officers to amend service timetables to ensure that learners are dropped off and collected at schools at the correct times. There will be enough seats on buses, and this will continue to be monitored. At an earlier discussion on this, we heard that 20% of seats on any public service will be reserved for paying passengers, so that the public will be able to use the services and they will be there for young people getting to school as well. Our experience to date is that travelling on public services do not increase the risk of safeguarding incidents. These are monitored carefully, and in the last school year, there were 23 recorded safeguarding incidents on some form of public, on school transport. Of those 23 recorded cases, 22 were on school buses. One was on a public service. So the weight of evidence suggests that the use of public services together with CCTV monitoring is a safe way of getting our children to school. We will work closely with operators to monitor the behaviour of passengers and review safeguarding measures and transport methods where there are substantiated concerns, but to date there have not been any. This policy supports the learner travel measure issued by the Welsh Government, which my colleague Councillor Maybe referred to as in the hierarchy of travel, very high up on getting people to use public transport. And therefore, we think it supports Welsh Government policy, our own corporate and community policy, and for the reasons I've outlined, is a very effective and long used way of getting children to secondary schools in the county.
Very comprehensive answer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Grocott. So we have one recommendation here, which is to approve the transport policy and ensure that it is published by the 1st of October in accordance with the requirements of the learner traveller measure. Are we in agreement with this, Cabinet?
Yes.
Before we move on to the next item, I'd just like to echo that appreciation to the officers, because the start of term is always fraught for everybody, and getting transport right in any way has got to be top of the list, and knowing it's safe and reliable and there is really important. And I noticed that Becky Pritchard is online, so thank you very much. And wherever you are, Deb Hill House, have a good holiday. So we come to the last item.
Yeah, just excuse me, we'll have to leave.
Which we looked at a previous cabinet, which is the outcome of the statutory objection, because we were looking at last time, I think we were going out to consultation. So once again, over to you, Councillor Grocott.
Once again, thank you.
The sound of your voice.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, the process works its way forward, and this is part of that process towards the Cabinet and Council's view that we should establish Welsh medium primary education in Monmouth. The purpose of this report is to provide Cabinet with the outcome of the statutory objection period regarding the authority's intention to establish a 3 to 11 Welsh medium primary. The recommendations are set out in the report, and I'd just like to run briefly through the key issues. But I would like to say that there has been one objection only, and that was from the Wye Valley Community Council. And their objection in a nutshell was that there are more elderly residents in that part of the county than youngsters, that the enrolments in primary English medium education in the valley are falling, and that those people pupils in Welsh medium education will learn some Welsh through the Welsh curriculum in any case. So the main issues that have arisen then, in line with the requirements of the School Organisation Code, the Council has produced an objection report that highlights the objection that we received. The objection period closed on the 17th of July, and there was only this one statutory objection received. The establishment of a Welsh medium primary school in Monmouth will ensure that more pupils can be taught through the medium of Welsh within their local area, and in doing so, give parents the confidence to choose a Welsh medium education for their children. In addition, a third Welsh medium school within Monmouthshire will put us in a strong position to meet our target of 120 reception learners by the end of the current WESP plan, which runs until 2031. Following the consultation process and feedback received from parents, it was agreed that further consideration would be given as to whether free home-to-school transport should be provided for the younger siblings of existing pupils who are on the roll of Ysgol Gymraeg Aveni, which is based in Abergavenny. Although the local authority understands parents' concerns, it's recommended that transport will be provided in line with the current policy to ensure that the new school establishes itself in the local community. In other words, children would have the opportunity to go to their local catchment Welsh medium school. Thank you, Jane.
Oh, thank you. I think it's...
I normally go on for far longer, I realise that.
But we love the sound of your voice, Councillor Kirkcott. There are no recommendations. It's a reporting around the objection. But if anyone has any comments, I know I'm delighted that we're going ahead with this. It's really important that we encourage Welsh language, and it's really important that we offer the coming generation that opportunity to learn in Welsh medium all the way through from their first day in education. Councillor John, I believe you have some questions you'd like to ask.
I do, thank you, Leader. And as you know, the Conservative group supports the development of a Welsh medium school in Monmouth. We believe that families in Monmouth and the surrounding communities at the moment don't really have a meaningful choice between English and Welsh medium because of the length of time it takes to get to Ysgol Aveni as their nearest Welsh medium school. So this will give families a choice that they don't have currently. Obviously, you were hoping to open the school in September 2023. That plan didn't go ahead. So what steps are you taking to maximise the appeal of the new school and to raise awareness to ensure that parents do realise they have that choice now, and to ensure that the school really does open in September next year?
Thank you, Councillor John, and thank you for the support of your side of the chamber as well. I'm happy to give a response to your question. A marketing campaign for the new school has been launched and will run alongside the nursery and primary school admission rounds. This will be a pixel targeted campaign aimed at families living in the Monmouth cluster. The local authority and I attended an event that was held at Monmouth Leisure Centre to promote the new school, and the local authority will be attending the USC show to promote Welsh medium education and specifically the new Monmouth school. There's a Welsh medium promotion group that has been established that meets monthly and is facilitated by the local authority, and representatives from the key Welsh medium education organisations all attend that meeting.
Thank you. And what consideration has been given to a name for the school, and what engagement will you be doing in the community on ideas and thoughts about what the new school should be called?
I remember with the derision that you came out with when I suggested similarly the new name for the 3 to 19 school in Abergavenny, when I said I was tempted to suggest the Martin Grocott Academy. So
Ysgol Martin Grocott, is it?
Reassure you that Ysgol Grocott, it will not feature on the shortlist in Monmouth.
Right, we can make a note of that.
You will remember from your time in the education cabinet role that we meet on a regular basis with all of the Welsh medium organisations that are involved in any way with education or youth work. And we will have detailed discussions with them in the Welsh Education Forum that meets here in County Hall on a regular basis. And following the success of the initiative in Abergavenny, we'll also be working with Monmouth Town Council so they can try and get a real feel in the town of Monmouth what people there would like to see as the name for the new school.
Okay, thank you. And I would remind you, obviously, it's not just the school for the town; it's the wider community as well. But that sounds positive. Thank you.
But the wider organisations that come together in the forum will represent the whole of Monmouthshire in a sense. But of course, it's probably worth mentioning that at the end of the day, there's a county council responsibility in law to give the name to a school. And I look forward to your input when we get to that debate.
Diolch.
I'm sure we'll get it. We know you're a multilingualist, Councillor John. It was drawn to my attention that I was so joyful that we are having a third school in 2024. I forgot there were recommendations. Thank you very much, Councillor Chandler, because this is about proceeding with this very exciting development for central Monmouthshire, really. We're asked to agree to establish the school in Overmonmouth Primary School, and we're asked the officers to take the necessary steps to establish a temporary governing body taking it forward, and that we agree that home to school transport will only be awarded in line with the policy that we're developing now, and we'll look at again along with our statutory duties going forward. So we have 3 recommendations there, colleagues. Are we in agreement? Could we have a show of hands, please? Yes, thank you. I think that brings us to the end. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Another word.
Yeah.
Diolch pawb.
Thank you. Bye.
Nos da.